What if everything you thought you knew about your everyday products was a lie? What if those things you buy without a second thought were made from surprising, and even disturbing, materials that affect your health, the environment, and the future of our planet? This story begins with Jessica Harper, a journalist whose life was forever changed the day she stumbled upon a viral video that revealed the shocking truth behind 10 products Elon Musk claims you'll stop buying once you know what they're made of. Jessica's journey isn't just about uncovering facts, it's about facing uncomfortable realities, challenging powerful corporations, and finding hope amid the chaos. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jessica often asks herself this question as she dives deeper into the investigation that will test her courage and change the way you see the world. Born and raised in a small town in Ohio, Jessica grew up surrounded by hard-working people who believed in the American dream but faced crushing hardships when her father's factory shut down. Money was tight, and hope was sometimes harder to come by, but her mother's unwavering spirit and a close bond with her younger brother Mark taught her resilience. Jessica's childhood was marked by memories of empty dinner tables, whispered worries about bills, and a yearning to break free from the cycle of struggle. Yet, even in those hard times, she held on to a fierce curiosity about the world beyond her town, fueled by books, documentaries, and a secret dream to become a journalist. After graduating college with a degree in investigative journalism, Jessica moved to New York City, determined to expose truths that mattered. But the city was a harsh teacher. She faced rejection, deadlines, and the loneliness of a newcomer. Her relationships were complicated, friendships were strained by long hours and emotional exhaustion. Still, her brother Mark remained her anchor, a voice of grounded skepticism but unconditional support. When the viral video about those 10 products started making rounds on social media, Jessica was skeptical but intrigued. The video featured Elon Musk, a figure both revered and criticized, speaking candidly about the hidden realities behind everyday products we all use: smartphones, fast fashion, bottled water, and more. Musk's message was simple yet profound: transparency is power. If consumers knew what these products were really made of, they would choose differently, and the world would be forced to change. Jessica saw a story worth telling, one that could ignite change and hold corporations accountable. But what began as a professional curiosity soon turned personal when she discovered the darker side of the supply chains powering these products: child labor, environmental devastation, and toxic chemicals with hidden health risks. Her investigation took her into the heart of America's industrial zones, into foreign mines, and into the lives of workers and families affected by this shadow economy. Along the way, she faced resistance from PR teams, online trolls, and even legal threats. She found herself caught between the desire to reveal the truth and the fear of the consequences. Each step uncovered more questions, more conflicts, and more reasons to keep pushing forward. The first product on the list was the smartphone, a device most Americans consider essential. Jessica dug into the rare minerals mined in the Congo, where children as young as 10 risked their lives in dangerous conditions to extract cobalt. She interviewed miners who spoke of long hours, exploitation, and few alternatives. Then she traced the manufacturing process to factories in China, revealing harsh working conditions and relentless quotas. The story was more than just facts, it was a human tragedy wrapped in shiny technology. Next, she tackled fast fashion, discovering synthetic fibers made from petroleum that pollute waterways and fill landfills. Toxic dyes poisoned rivers in countries far from the American consumer's view. Jessica confronted a popular fashion influencer who defended the industry, sparking a heated debate about convenience, ethics, and responsibility. Bottled water, another staple, came under scrutiny as Jessica traveled to a Pacific island smothered in plastic waste. The contrast between the purity promised by marketers and the pollution caused by single-use plastics was staggering. She met activists fighting to protect their homes, offering a glimpse of hope amid destruction. Energy drinks revealed a cocktail of synthetic chemicals linked to health problems, and Jessica interviewed health experts who warned about addiction and long-term risks. Children's toys were found to contain toxic materials and poor safety standards, leading to heartbreaking stories from parents. The beauty industry wasn't spared either. Jessica uncovered the use of animal byproducts and harmful preservatives hidden behind glamorous labels. Packaged snacks, cleaning products, mattresses, and coffee pods all had their own dark stories: artificial additives, carcinogens, flame retardants, and massive waste, each product a puzzle piece in a larger picture of consumer ignorance and corporate secrecy. Throughout this journey, Jessica faced moments of despair and moments of hope. Corporate forces tried to silence her, but she found allies in whistleblowers, engineers, and everyday consumers demanding change. When her brother Mark fell ill due to exposure to toxic products, the stakes became personal, fueling her determination. The climax came during a live televised confrontation with a major corporation's CEO, where Jessica exposed lies and demanded transparency. The public response was overwhelming, both supportive and hostile. Grassroots movements and sustainable startups gained momentum, inspired by Jessica's work and Elon Musk's vision of a future where transparency and sustainability are not optional but essential. In the end, Jessica's story is one of growth, courage, and a relentless pursuit of truth. She learned that life is full of surprises, but knowledge and love can lead the way through the darkest moments. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? She asks, inviting you to reflect and join the movement for change. This story might just spark a new beginning. The road ahead is uncertain, but the power to change the world lies in the hands of those willing to see, know, and act. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jessica Harper's story didn't begin with a viral video or a headline. It began in a small town called Millfield, Ohio, where the echoes of factory whistles and the hum of machines once filled the air but had long since fallen silent. She was born to working-class parents. Her father, Tom Harper, was a factory foreman, and her mother, Linda, a school librarian. The factory was the heart of the town, the pulse that kept families fed and hopes alive, but when the plant shut down unexpectedly, everything changed. Tom's job vanished overnight, and with it, the security Jessica's family had relied on. She remembers the nights when bills went unpaid, when her mother's worried glances masked the fear they dared not speak aloud. Jessica, barely 10 at the time, learned early that life could change in an instant. Yet, those hardships also forged a quiet strength inside her, a determination to find a better way. She often escaped into books, devouring stories about faraway places, technological wonders, and heroes who faced impossible odds. She wanted to be one of them, someone who made a difference. But the challenges weren't just financial. Jessica's mother was diagnosed with a chronic illness when Jessica was in high school, adding a new layer of responsibility and worry. Jessica juggled school, part-time jobs, and caregiving, all while trying to keep her dreams alive. Her younger brother, Mark, was her closest ally and greatest source of comfort. Though less ambitious and more cautious, Mark was fiercely loyal and often her sounding board when the weight of their reality grew heavy. Family dinners became rare, replaced by rushed meals and whispered phone calls. Yet, their bond never wavered. Jessica's teenage years were also marked by complicated friendships. Some drifted away, unable to understand her restless ambition, others brought moments of joy and escape. Still, a sense of isolation lingered beneath the surface. At college, Jessica's life shifted again. She was accepted into a journalism program far from home, in a bustling city where she was one among thousands. The anonymity was both freeing and daunting. She thrived academically but struggled socially, feeling the pull of loneliness amid the noise. Her small-town values sometimes clashed with the fast-paced, often superficial world around her. After graduation, Jessica moved to New York City, chasing a career in investigative journalism. The reality was harsher than she expected. She faced rejection after rejection from news outlets and lived in a cramped apartment with barely enough to cover rent. Late nights spent pitching stories and researching led to exhaustion, but her passion never dimmed. She saw the stories that others overlooked, the struggles of everyday people, the consequences of corporate greed, the silent suffering behind glossy ads. It was during this time she first heard about Elon Musk's call for radical transparency and sustainability. She was intrigued by his vision but also skeptical. Could one man's ideas truly challenge the massive systems controlling production and consumption? When a viral video surfaced, featuring Musk exposing the hidden truths about everyday products, Jessica saw an opportunity. The video claimed that 10 popular products Americans buy daily were made with materials and processes that consumers would never approve of if they knew the facts. This wasn't just about product recalls or minor scandals, it was about systemic problems, environmental destruction, labor exploitation, and health risks. Jessica felt compelled to investigate, not just as a reporter but as someone whose family and community had been affected by the fallout of unchecked industrial practices. Her first steps were cautious. She began researching the products mentioned: smartphones, fast fashion, bottled water, energy drinks, children's toys, cosmetics, packaged snacks, cleaning products, mattresses, and coffee pods. Each product seemed ordinary, even essential, but the deeper she dug, the more alarming the revelations. The cobalt mining in the Congo for smartphone batteries was linked to child labor and deadly conditions. The polyester in cheap clothes came from oil refining, polluting rivers and harming wildlife. Plastic waste from bottled water was choking oceans and harming marine life. Synthetic chemicals in energy drinks posed long-term health risks. Toys made with toxic materials threatened children's safety. Beauty products often contained animal byproducts and harmful preservatives. Snacks were loaded with artificial ingredients and additives. Household cleaners released chemicals linked to respiratory problems. Mattresses were treated with flame retardants that could cause illness. Single-use coffee pods contributed to growing landfill mountains. Jessica faced the daunting task of verifying these claims. Corporate denials and carefully crafted PR campaigns obscured the truth. Some companies attempted to discredit her research, warning of lawsuits and consequences. Online trolls and social media backlash added to the pressure. At times, Jessica felt isolated, overwhelmed by the scale of the problem and the resistance she encountered. But she also found allies. Whistleblowers who had risked their jobs to share insider information. Engineers and scientists who believed in transparency and ethical innovation. Activists and consumers demanding change. These connections gave Jessica hope and renewed energy. To understand the human impact, Jessica traveled to places few Americans had ever seen. She visited mining communities in the Congo, witnessing firsthand the dangerous work and the poverty it fueled. She toured factories in China where workers endured long shifts and relentless quotas. She walked along polluted rivers in Bangladesh and India, where dye from textile factories stained the water unnatural colors. She met families affected by toxic chemicals and environmental degradation. These encounters deepened Jessica's resolve. She was no longer reporting from a distance, she was part of a larger story, one about justice, accountability, and the future of the planet. Despite the challenges, Jessica's relationships sustained her. Mark remained her steadfast supporter, offering practical help and emotional grounding. Their late-night conversations about the world and their dreams reminded Jessica why she fought so hard. Her mother's health continued to be a concern, adding urgency to Jessica's mission to expose dangers hidden in everyday products. Along the way, Jessica also wrestled with her own doubts and fears. Was she risking too much? Could one person really make a difference? The corporate forces pushing back against her were powerful and well-funded. The public's attention was fleeting. But then, moments of breakthrough rekindled her spirit. A key whistleblower agreed to meet. A respected scientist publicly backed her findings. A grassroots campaign inspired by her articles gained traction. Each victory, small but meaningful, reinforced her belief that transparency could change consumer habits and corporate behavior. As Jessica's investigation deepened, she realized the journey was as much about personal growth as it was about uncovering facts. She learned to navigate fear, to stand firm in the face of opposition, and to embrace vulnerability. She discovered the power of connection, with family, allies, and the wider community. Her story became not just one of exposing what's wrong but also imagining what's possible. Elon Musk's vision of a transparent, sustainable future was ambitious, but Jessica believed it was worth striving for. The path ahead was uncertain, full of obstacles and surprises, but she was ready to face them. Because the stakes were too high to ignore. Because every product, every choice, had a story, and sometimes, that story could change everything. Jessica's investigation soon shifted from quiet research to a storm of conflict. As she began exposing the troubling realities behind the products Elon Musk had highlighted, she found herself pushed to the edge by forces determined to keep those truths hidden. The first clash came when Jessica published an article about the cobalt mines powering the smartphone industry. The story detailed harrowing accounts from miners in the Congo. Some barely old enough to walk, working dangerous conditions to extract the rare minerals feeding the world's tech obsession. Immediately, corporate PR teams responded with denials, accusing her of exaggeration and spreading misinformation. Jessica's inbox flooded with threatening emails and calls from lawyers warning her to retract or face lawsuits. The tension grew heavier when online trolls targeted her personally, flooding social media with harassment that tested her resolve. It was a moment of crisis, and Jessica felt isolated, questioning if the fight was worth it. But her brother Mark's voice was steady on the phone, reminding her why she started this journey. "You're telling the truth, Jess. Keep going." Encouraged, Jessica pushed forward. Next, she turned to fast fashion, uncovering how cheap polyester and synthetic fibers devastated ecosystems through toxic dyes and overwhelming landfill waste. She interviewed factory workers in Bangladesh, many of whom labored in unsafe conditions for minimal pay. When she confronted a popular fashion influencer who defended the industry's ethics on a live webcast, the tension erupted. The influencer dismissed Jessica's findings as alarmist and accused her of trying to shame consumers. The debate sparked heated discussions online and off, forcing Jessica into the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. Yet, even as the controversy intensified, moments of hope emerged. An environmental scientist she interviewed provided her with data proving the long-term damage of these synthetic materials, offering hope that alternatives could replace harmful fabrics. This back and forth of conflict and hope would become the rhythm of Jessica's journey. The third product she investigated was bottled water, a staple of American convenience culture. Jessica traveled to a small island in the Pacific Ocean where she witnessed the devastating impact of plastic pollution firsthand. Waves crashed against shores littered with discarded bottles and packaging. She met activists fighting to clean their home, sharing stories of endangered wildlife and poisoned fishing grounds. When she published her exposé revealing the gap between bottled water's pure image and its environmental cost, corporate sponsors launched counter-campaigns. Jessica was accused of fearmongering and harming an industry that employed thousands. But her interviews with marine biologists and local fishermen gave her story credibility and galvanized public support for plastic reduction movements. Energy drinks were next on the list. Jessica uncovered the hidden cocktail of synthetic chemicals, excessive caffeine, and additives that posed serious health risks. She spoke with doctors who treated patients suffering from addiction and heart problems linked to these beverages. Despite the mounting evidence, energy drink companies aggressively marketed their products to young people, sponsoring extreme sports and music festivals to maintain their image. Jessica faced aggressive pushback, including efforts to discredit her medical sources. Yet she also encountered recovering addicts who shared their stories publicly, inspiring campaigns for better labeling and regulation. Children's toys presented another troubling discovery. Jessica's research revealed that many toys contain toxic materials, phthalates, lead, and other harmful substances banned in many countries but still found in cheap imports. She spoke with concerned parents whose children had experienced health issues potentially linked to these toxins. Industry representatives denied any wrongdoing, claiming compliance with safety standards. Jessica's reporting fueled calls for stricter regulations and better consumer awareness. In the world of makeup and cosmetics, Jessica uncovered widespread use of animal byproducts and dangerous preservatives. Many brands marketed themselves as natural or cruelty-free, but often fell short. She interviewed former industry insiders who revealed that cost-cutting measures often trumped ethics. The emotional toll was heavy, as Jessica struggled with her own use of these products and the widespread complicity of consumers. Packaged snacks revealed yet another layer of deception. Jessica's deep dive exposed artificial ingredients, chemical preservatives, and questionable additives designed to enhance flavor and shelf life but potentially harmful to health. She spoke with nutritionists and food scientists who explained the long-term consequences of these substances. Despite efforts to promote healthier options, snack companies fiercely defended their products, often targeting children with colorful packaging and advertising. Household cleaning products contained chemicals linked to respiratory problems, skin irritation, and environmental harm. Jessica's investigation uncovered that many of these harmful substances were not disclosed on labels, leaving consumers unaware of the risks. She interviewed health advocates and environmentalists pushing for transparency and safer alternatives. The industry pushback was fierce, with lobbyists working to block new regulations. Mattresses, something most people consider safe and comforting, had their own dark side. Jessica learned about the flame retardants and synthetic foams used in many popular brands, substances linked to illnesses and environmental contamination. She met families affected by these chemicals and experts advocating for safer materials. Coffee pods, loved for their convenience, were revealed to create massive waste problems, with billions ending up in landfills annually. Jessica traced the supply chain and production process, revealing questionable sourcing and manufacturing practices. When her reports aired, coffee companies responded with PR campaigns emphasizing recycling efforts, but Jessica remained skeptical. Each new discovery brought fresh challenges. Jessica often faced legal threats and intimidation from powerful corporations determined to maintain the status quo. Social media became a battlefield where misinformation spread rapidly, undermining her credibility among some audiences. Yet, with every attack, Jessica found unexpected support, from whistleblowers willing to share their stories, to scientists providing data, to grassroots activists organizing public pressure campaigns. The climax hope climax pattern played out repeatedly, a shocking revelation, climax, followed by a supportive breakthrough or ally, hope, then a renewed challenge or backlash, climax. This emotional roller coaster tested Jessica's endurance and belief in the cause. One particularly harrowing moment came when a major corporation filed a lawsuit accusing Jessica of defamation. The legal battle drained her financially and emotionally. She questioned if she could continue, fearing for her career and safety. But when Mark was hospitalized with symptoms linked to chemical exposure from a household product they had both used, Jessica's mission took on urgent personal meaning. The fight was no longer just professional, it was about protecting those she loved. She doubled down, pushing through fear and exhaustion. Jessica's story began to resonate widely, inspiring readers to question their purchases and demand accountability. Public forums buzzed with debate, and new consumer groups formed to advocate for transparency and ethical production. Corporations started to respond, some pledging to improve sourcing and labeling. Elon Musk's call for radical transparency gained traction, seen not just as idealistic but necessary. Through the mounting conflict and setbacks, Jessica grew stronger. She developed a sharper sense of strategy, learning to navigate the complex intersection of media, law, and public opinion. Her relationships deepened, Mark became not just her brother but a partner in advocacy, and new allies emerged from unexpected places. Jessica also confronted her own vulnerabilities, learning to accept help and balance the fight with self-care. The investigation had started as a curiosity sparked by a viral video but evolved into a profound personal and professional journey. Jessica understood that exposing these 10 products was just the beginning. The system was vast and complex, but change was possible if enough people demanded it. As Jessica reflected on the rising conflict that defined this chapter of her life, she held on to one truth. Every product carried a story, every choice had consequences, and the power to change the future rested in the hands of those willing to look beyond the surface and act. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Jessica, it was the belief that truth matters, and that love for family and future generations made every battle worth fighting. Jessica's journey took an unexpected turn when a mysterious tip led her to a small startup in Silicon Valley that claimed to be developing revolutionary materials to replace the toxic components found in the 10 products she'd exposed. This was a new frontier. Beyond exposing problems, it was about discovering solutions and innovations that could change the game. The startup, called Terranova Materials, was led by a former engineer from a major tech giant who had grown disillusioned with the industry's lack of transparency and environmental responsibility. Jessica arranged a meeting with Dr. Elena Morales, the CEO and visionary behind the company. Elena's passion was palpable as she described their mission: to create sustainable, biodegradable materials that could be used in everything from smartphones to packaging, without sacrificing quality or affordability. Walking through their lab felt like stepping into the future. There were sleek machines humming quietly, samples of plant-based plastics and non-toxic fabrics laid out on tables, and prototypes of consumer goods crafted with care and innovation. Elena explained the challenges they faced: cost barriers, scaling production, and convincing industries to adopt new materials over entrenched, cheaper options. But the hope was undeniable. For Jessica, this was a stark contrast to the grim realities she had uncovered. Here was an alternative path, filled with potential. Her writing began to reflect this new journey, balancing harsh truths with hopeful possibilities. As she documented Terranova's progress, she traveled with Elena and her team to partner factories attempting pilot programs using these materials. She witnessed workers learning new processes and communities eager for cleaner manufacturing practices. Yet, obstacles remained. The entrenched interests pushing back against change were formidable. Corporations used lobbying and marketing to cast doubt on sustainable alternatives, labeling them too expensive or unproven. Jessica's reporting uncovered that some companies secretly funded campaigns to discredit startups like Terranova. At one point, Jessica attended a heated industry conference where debates over sustainability standards grew intense. Lobbyists and CEOs clashed with environmental advocates and innovators, each side wielding statistics and rhetoric in a battle for the future of production. The tension in the room was electric, reflecting the stakes on a global scale. Jessica's role as a journalist became more than reporting. She was now a bridge connecting innovators, consumers, and activists. Her articles inspired readers to support sustainable brands and demand transparency. Social media buzzed with conversations sparked by her stories, and grassroots campaigns gained momentum. Jessica also explored how individual choices could drive systemic change. She met families who had committed to reducing plastic use, switching to organic clothing, and supporting local, ethical producers. Their stories were inspiring but also revealed the challenges of making sustainable living accessible and affordable for all. One particularly vivid scene stayed with Jessica: a visit to a small coastal town where Terranova's biodegradable packaging pilot program was replacing plastic waste that had once clogged beaches and harmed marine life. Locals spoke with gratitude and cautious optimism. For Jessica, it was a reminder that real change was possible when people, companies, and governments worked together. Despite the hopeful progress, Jessica's emotional journey was complex. She struggled with feelings of frustration when innovations stalled or were dismissed by powerful players. Moments of doubt crept in when progress seemed slow, or when she received harsh criticism from those invested in the old systems. At times, the weight of the world felt overwhelming, but her bond with Mark remained a source of strength. Mark, who had grown more involved in advocacy, often reminded her to celebrate small victories and practice self-care. Together, they organized community events and spoke at schools, spreading awareness and inspiring the next generation. Jessica also explored the psychological impact of consumer culture on individuals and society. She met psychologists and sociologists who explained how marketing exploits human emotions, fear, desire, status, to drive consumption, often at the expense of well-being and sustainability. This insight deepened Jessica's understanding of the challenges ahead. Changing products was only part of the battle, changing minds and habits was equally crucial. Her articles began to incorporate these perspectives, urging readers not only to be informed consumers but to rethink the very culture of consumption. Alongside these explorations, Jessica encountered personal challenges. The demands of her work strained her relationships outside of Mark, including old friends and new acquaintances who found it hard to keep up with her intense focus. She grappled with loneliness and the pressure of carrying the story forward. Yet, each breakthrough, each moment of connection, renewed her purpose. As the chapter progressed, Jessica uncovered an unexpected ally, a former executive from a major corporation who had become disillusioned with the industry's ethics and wanted to help from within. He provided insider documents and strategic advice, helping Jessica navigate corporate tactics and amplify her impact. This collaboration was risky but rewarding, opening new doors and revealing deeper layers of the systemic problems. The climax of this chapter came during a major public event, a summit on sustainability and innovation held in San Francisco. Jessica was invited to moderate a panel featuring Elena Morales, the former executive, activists, and industry leaders. The discussion was heated and revealing, with moments of conflict and breakthrough. When a powerful CEO questioned the viability of sustainable materials, Elena responded with data and heartfelt appeals about responsibility to future generations. The audience's reaction was electric, signaling a shift in public consciousness. Jessica felt the culmination of her journey so far, the intersection of conflict, hope, and action, laying the foundation for what was to come. The emotional climax was intense as Jessica reflected on how far she had come from that small town in Ohio. The journey was no longer just about uncovering dark truths, it was about pioneering a new way forward. The contrast between the despair of exploitation and the hope of innovation defined her evolving worldview. As the chapter closed, Jessica penned a reflection that would become one of her most read pieces, a call to action grounded in both realism and optimism. She urged readers to demand transparency, support innovation, and embrace the discomfort of change. Her message was clear: the future is not predetermined, and every choice matters. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Jessica, it was the belief that innovation paired with integrity could reshape the world. That story might just spark a new beginning, not just for her but for all who dare to imagine and work for a better future. The journey was far from over, but this unexpected turn opened new horizons, full of challenges and possibilities. The moment Jessica had been building toward finally arrived when a major, unfiltered truth exploded onto the scene, shaking everything she thought she knew. It was the emotional climax of her investigation, the revelation that would both shock and inspire her audience, and fundamentally change how people viewed the products they used every day. It started with a confidential document leaked by a whistleblower within one of the largest corporations she had been investigating, a multinational conglomerate responsible for producing several of the products on Elon Musk's list. The document detailed internal discussions about knowingly using cheaper, hazardous materials to cut costs, fully aware of the health risks and environmental damage. The company had suppressed this information from regulators, consumers, and even some shareholders for years. The gravity of this disclosure hit Jessica like a tidal wave. Here was undeniable proof of corporate deception on a scale that could not be ignored. It was the climax she had both feared and hoped for, the ultimate confirmation that her relentless pursuit of truth was justified. The story was explosive, and Jessica's article broke across major media outlets within hours, triggering a firestorm of public outrage. People felt betrayed, angry that their health, safety, and the planet had been compromised for profit. Activists organized protests, lawmakers demanded hearings, and consumers flooded social media with calls for boycotts. Jessica found herself thrust into the spotlight as the face of this movement for transparency. But the story did not end there. In the aftermath of the revelation, something remarkable happened: hope emerged from the chaos. The public's reaction forced corporations to respond. Some executives resigned or were fired, while others pledged sweeping reforms and cooperation with investigations. New legislation was proposed to tighten safety standards, improve labeling, and increase oversight. Investors started pressuring companies to adopt sustainable practices, and consumers became more vigilant about the products they bought. Jessica witnessed the power of collective action, how truth combined with public will could drive meaningful change. Yet, this hopeful moment was quickly tested. The conglomerate and others launched aggressive counterattacks. They hired top lawyers, PR firms, and lobbyists to discredit Jessica's work, intimidate sources, and stall reform efforts. The legal threats escalated into lawsuits seeking to silence her. False information campaigns sowed confusion and doubt among the public. Jessica endured personal attacks and threats to her safety. The battle lines were drawn clearly, one side fighting to maintain profits and control, the other demanding accountability and justice. Jessica's emotional resilience was pushed to its limits. She faced moments of despair, wondering if the fight was sustainable, if the sacrifices were worth it. Yet, she drew strength from unexpected places. Friends and family rallied around her, including Mark, whose unwavering support became her anchor. A growing network of allies in journalism, science, activism, and even some corporate reformers fortified her efforts. She realized that the fight was no longer hers alone, it belonged to a movement. In the midst of this turmoil, Jessica uncovered a personal connection to the scandal that deepened her resolve. A childhood friend's family had suffered health problems linked to exposure to toxic chemicals in a household product from the conglomerate. Their story personalized the abstract statistics and reports, reminding Jessica why exposing these truths mattered so deeply. She shared this story publicly, humanizing the issue and touching hearts across the country. This emotional resonance amplified the movement's momentum, inspiring more people to demand change. Meanwhile, the complexity of the issues became clearer. Jessica explored the tangled web of global supply chains, regulatory loopholes, and economic pressures that allowed such corporate misconduct to persist. She interviewed economists and policy experts who explained how market incentives often clash with ethical imperatives, making reform difficult but necessary. Jessica's reporting became a call not just for transparency but for systemic transformation. The climax-hope-climax pattern repeated again, the devastating truth, climax, the surge of public and political will, hope, and the fierce pushback by entrenched interests, climax. This tension created a dynamic and gripping narrative that kept readers engaged and invested. Jessica's writing style captured the emotional roller coaster, weaving vivid scenes of protest marches, tense courtroom battles, and quiet moments of reflection. Through it all, she showed the human faces behind the headlines, the whistleblowers risking everything, families struggling to heal, activists burning the midnight oil, and consumers grappling with the implications of their choices. The emotional climax was more than a story, it was a movement awakening. As Jessica moved closer to the resolution, she confronted the broader meaning of her work. It was not simply about exposing 10 products or a single company's wrongdoing. It was about questioning the systems that allowed such problems to persist and imagining a future where transparency, ethics, and sustainability were the norms. She reflected on Elon Musk's vision of radical transparency, not just a slogan but a necessary revolution in how business and society operate. The journey had changed Jessica profoundly. She had grown from a determined but uncertain reporter into a seasoned advocate and leader. The challenges had tested her courage, resilience, and beliefs. The relationships she'd built sustained her and opened new paths. Most importantly, she had learned that change was possible but required perseverance, collaboration, and hope. The chapter closed with Jessica attending a congressional hearing where corporate executives were grilled over their practices. She sat in the audience, heart pounding, witnessing accountability in action. Afterward, she spoke to young journalists and activists, urging them to continue the work. Life is full of surprises, she told them, but love and truth will always lead the way. Her story was far from over, but this moment marked a turning point. A step toward a better future fueled by courage and conviction. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Jessica, it was the unwavering belief that every voice matters and that shining light on darkness can spark change. This emotional climax set the stage for the resolution and reflection to come, as Jessica prepared to share the lessons she had learned and the hope she wanted to inspire in others. After the emotional upheaval of the scandal and the whirlwind of activism, Jessica found herself at a crossroads, ready to reflect deeply on what she had learned and how her journey had changed her, not just as a journalist, but as a woman, a sister, and a citizen of a complex world. The resolution of this chapter came gently, like a breath after a storm, a time for meaning and wisdom to settle in. She looked back on the tangled path that had led her here. From a curious spark ignited by Elon Musk's viral video, through conflict and revelation, to a burgeoning movement for transparency and change. The hardest moments had tested her faith in humanity and her own strength. Yet, in every setback, she had found a glimmer of hope, often in unexpected places. Jessica's transformation was clear. She began the journey driven by curiosity and a desire to expose wrongdoing, but now she carried a deeper understanding of complexity, nuance, and the power of collective action. She had learned that real change is rarely quick or easy, but it is possible when people come together with love, courage, and determination. One of the most profound lessons Jessica discovered was about sacrifice, what it truly meant to give of oneself for a cause greater than personal gain. She reflected on how her relationships had been strained, how she had lost friends who couldn't keep up with her intensity, and yet how those who stayed close had become anchors of love and support. Mark, especially, had been a constant source of strength, reminding her to find balance and to nurture herself even as she fought for justice. Through their shared experiences, Jessica realized that love, whether for family, community, or the planet, was the foundation that gave her fight meaning and kept her going through the darkest nights. In quiet moments, Jessica visited places that symbolized the contrast between destruction and hope. She walked along beaches once choked with plastic waste, now cleaner thanks to community efforts inspired by her reporting. She spent time with artisans creating sustainable clothing and entrepreneurs developing eco-friendly products. These experiences filled her with a renewed sense of possibility. The resolution was not about an ending, but about embracing ongoing responsibility. Jessica also pondered the philosophical lessons embedded in her journey. She recognized how consumer culture often numbed people to the consequences of their choices, creating a disconnect between comfort and cost. She wrote eloquently about how awareness was the first step toward reclaiming agency, urging readers to see their purchasing power as a form of activism. Her writing encouraged empathy, not only for victims of corporate greed but also for those caught in systems of poverty and exploitation. Jessica emphasized that compassion and education must go hand in hand to create lasting change. The story's final message became a call to love and action, to care deeply about the world, to speak truth boldly, and to hold on to hope even when the path is uncertain. Jessica's character had grown from a solitary investigator into a leader who inspired others to join the movement. She had learned to listen, to collaborate, and to find joy in small victories. She understood that maturity meant embracing complexity without losing sight of core values. The last scenes of this chapter showed Jessica at a community gathering celebrating Earth Day, surrounded by people of all ages who had been touched by her story. Children performed songs about protecting nature, elders shared stories of resilience, and activists unveiled new projects inspired by the movement she helped ignite. Jessica felt a profound connection to this community, an embodiment of the change she dreamed of. As she stood among them, she addressed the crowd with warmth and conviction, reminding them that the journey was collective and ongoing. She invited everyone to take small steps toward sustainability, to question assumptions, and to support transparency in all aspects of life. The story closed on a hopeful note, underscored by a powerful reminder: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. This simple truth echoed the lessons learned throughout the story: the challenges, the heartbreak, the breakthroughs, and the enduring hope. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Jessica, it was love, in all its forms, and the unshakable belief that each of us can make a difference. Her journey was far from over, but this chapter marked a turning point, a moment of reflection and renewal before new adventures and challenges awaited. The narrative left readers inspired to look closely at their own lives and choices, to find courage in vulnerability, and to embrace the possibility that change begins with each of us, no matter how small. Jessica's story had become a mirror for a generation grappling with the complexities of a rapidly changing world, a story of conflict, hope, truth, and ultimately, love. Jessica's life settled into a new rhythm after the whirlwind of activism and reflection, but the story was far from over. As she continued to dig deeper into the supply chains behind everyday products, she uncovered an even more surprising layer of complexity. A web of hidden connections, secret deals, and ethical blind spots that challenged everything she thought she understood. This chapter began with Jessica receiving an anonymous tip about a shadowy network of suppliers who provided raw materials to the very companies she had exposed. These suppliers operated in remote regions around the world, often in developing countries where regulations were weak and oversight minimal. Curious and cautious, Jessica embarked on a journey that took her far from the familiar streets of San Francisco to the dense jungles of Southeast Asia and the mining towns of South America. The contrast was stark. Where American consumers saw sleek electronics or stylish clothing, Jessica saw the human toll behind the scenes, the hazardous working conditions, child labor, environmental devastation, and the exploitation of vulnerable communities. Her reports painted vivid pictures of dusty villages where families struggled to survive, forced to work in dangerous mines or factories with little protection or pay. These stories sparked outrage but also profound sadness, revealing the hidden cost of convenience and cheap products. Jessica's emotional connection to these people deepened as she met activists and local leaders fighting to improve conditions despite overwhelming odds. Their courage and resilience inspired her, but also made the stakes painfully real. She realized that exposing corporate wrongdoings in the U.S. was only part of the puzzle. True change required addressing global inequalities and systemic exploitation. The challenges multiplied when Jessica uncovered evidence that some companies knowingly sourced materials from these exploitative networks, turning a blind eye to abuses to maintain low costs and high profits. This revelation struck at the heart of consumer trust and corporate responsibility. Jessica's writing grew more urgent and impassioned, demanding transparency not only about product composition but about every link in the supply chain. At the same time, she grappled with the ethical dilemma of reporting on vulnerable communities, balancing the need to expose injustice with the risk of further harm or exploitation. She worked closely with local journalists and human rights organizations to ensure her coverage was respectful, accurate, and empowering. The complexity of these global supply chains introduced a new climax-hope-climax dynamic to her story. The climax was the harsh reality of exploitation and environmental destruction. The hope came from grassroots movements and international efforts to reform sourcing practices, and the subsequent climax was the corporate resistance and regulatory challenges that slowed progress. This cycle underscored the ongoing tension between profit-driven motives and ethical imperatives. Jessica's writing style continued to emphasize strong emotional storytelling, bringing readers into the sights, sounds, and feelings of distant communities. She described the oppressive heat of mines, the fatigue etched on workers' faces, and the vibrant cultural traditions that persisted despite hardship. Her words created a cinematic experience that made the distant feel immediate and personal. Alongside these field reports, Jessica explored innovative solutions emerging in these regions, fair trade initiatives, community cooperatives, and technological advances that increased transparency and worker safety. These stories of hope were crucial to balance the bleakness, demonstrating that change was possible with commitment and collaboration. Jessica's personal growth mirrored the expanding scope of her investigation. She became more globally aware and connected, forging relationships with activists, academics, and policymakers worldwide. She struggled at times with feelings of overwhelm and helplessness in the face of such vast challenges, but her determination never waned. Mark remained her steady companion, grounding her and reminding her of the impact of small actions. As the chapter progressed, Jessica found herself increasingly involved in advocacy beyond journalism. She participated in international conferences, advised NGOs, and helped design consumer education campaigns. Her voice gained authority, and she embraced the role of bridge between cultures, industries, and communities. The climax of this chapter was a dramatic encounter with a powerful executive from one of the implicated companies during a global sustainability summit. The confrontation was tense and public, highlighting the clash between entrenched interests and emerging ethical standards. Jessica's calm but firm questioning exposed contradictions and sparked widespread media coverage, further pressuring corporations to reform. The emotional climax was both exhausting and exhilarating for Jessica, proof that persistence and courage could disrupt even the most opaque systems. Yet, the chapter ended on a sober note, acknowledging that progress was uneven and fragile. New threats emerged, including attempts to undermine international regulations and the spread of misinformation campaigns designed to confuse consumers. Jessica recognized that vigilance and collective action were essential to sustain momentum. In closing, she reflected on the interconnectedness of the global community and the shared responsibility to protect human rights and the environment. Her message was clear. Consumers must demand transparency and accountability at every step, and corporations must embrace ethical sourcing as a fundamental duty. The chapter concluded with a poignant question posed to readers: what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Jessica, it was the faces and stories of the people she met, their courage and hope despite adversity, that fueled her commitment to keep telling the truth and fighting for a better world. This chapter deepened the narrative, adding layers of complexity and global perspective while maintaining the emotional core that had defined Jessica's journey. The story was evolving, becoming not only a call to awareness but an invitation to action on a global scale. Jessica's investigation had taken her across continents, exposing the harsh realities hidden behind everyday products, yet the deeper she dug, the more she realized that the consumer's role was only part of the story. The global economy thrived on a delicate balance of supply and demand, power and influence, transparency and secrecy, and Jessica was beginning to understand how political and economic forces shaped what ended up on store shelves. The next phase of her journey brought her into the intricate world of lobbying and legislation, a realm where money and influence often determined the rules of the game. In Washington, D.C., Jessica navigated the marble halls of power, attending hearings and meeting with lawmakers, activists, and industry insiders. The contrast between the idealism of public service and the harsh realities of corporate lobbying was stark. She uncovered that many of the reforms proposed after her earlier exposés faced fierce opposition from well-funded interest groups intent on preserving profits over people. Lobbyists wielded enormous influence, crafting legislation in ways that favored loopholes and weak oversight. She learned how campaign contributions, revolving door employment between corporations and government agencies, and strategic misinformation campaigns slowed or diluted meaningful reform. Jessica's reporting revealed a shadowy ecosystem that most consumers never saw but which had direct consequences for their health and the environment. Despite the cynicism that threatened to take root, Jessica also found hope in the passionate activists, whistleblowers, and reform-minded politicians determined to push back. Their stories reminded her that change required persistence, coalition building, and strategic engagement. Jessica chronicled how grassroots movements increasingly leveraged social media and public pressure to hold lawmakers accountable, while some corporations began to see transparency and sustainability as competitive advantages rather than burdens. One of the key moments in this chapter was Jessica's in-depth profile of a young congresswoman who had risen rapidly as a champion for consumer protection and environmental justice. Her determination and idealism inspired Jessica and gave the movement a fresh face. The congresswoman's efforts to draft new legislation faced repeated setbacks, but her resilience mirrored the overarching theme of hope amid struggle. Throughout this chapter, Jessica's narrative highlighted the tension between systemic inertia and grassroots energy, weaving together stories of lobbying battles, public protests, and the slow grind of policymaking. Her writing captured the emotional highs and lows, the exhilaration of legislative victories, the frustration of compromise, and the heartbreak of stalled bills. The complexity of the political system became another layer in the story, underscoring that transparency and ethics must be fought for on multiple fronts. Jessica's personal journey also reflected this complexity. She struggled to maintain optimism in the face of entrenched resistance and sometimes felt isolated within the corridors of power. Mark's support remained crucial as she balanced her roles as reporter, advocate, and advisor. Together, they navigated the ethical challenges of maintaining journalistic integrity while influencing policy. The climax of the chapter came when Jessica uncovered evidence that several lobbying firms had engaged in unethical tactics to block key provisions of a consumer safety bill, offering bribes, spreading false narratives, and exploiting loopholes. This discovery reignited public outrage and renewed calls for reform. Jessica's exposé led to congressional hearings, media scrutiny, and the resignation of several lobbyists. Yet, the emotional climax was tempered by the realization that such battles were ongoing and required continuous vigilance. The chapter concluded with Jessica attending a rally outside the Capitol, surrounded by a diverse crowd united by a shared demand for transparency and justice. She reflected on the power of collective action, and the importance of never losing sight of the people behind the policies, the consumers, workers, and communities impacted by these decisions. Her final words echoed a message she had come to live by: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She asked readers once again, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Jessica, it was the belief that informed citizens could reshape the system, that democracy depended on vigilance and participation. This chapter added a crucial political dimension to the story, expanding the scope of Jessica's fight from corporate boardrooms to government chambers, and reinforcing the intertwined nature of power, responsibility, and hope. The narrative remained rich with emotion and vivid detail, inviting readers to see themselves as part of a larger movement for change. Jessica's journey into the complex intersection of politics and commerce revealed just how deeply interconnected the systems controlling consumer products truly were, but she sensed there was still a critical piece missing. Beyond the factories and the halls of power lay the end users, the consumers themselves, whose habits, beliefs, and choices played a pivotal role in sustaining or challenging these systems. This chapter focused on the psychology of consumer behavior, exploring why people buy the products they do, often despite growing awareness of their harmful impacts. Jessica delved into studies by behavioral economists and psychologists who explained how marketing, social influence, and cognitive biases shaped purchasing decisions. She discovered how companies invested billions in advertising designed not only to sell products but to create emotional attachments, foster brand loyalty, and even trigger addictive behaviors. Through interviews with experts, Jessica learned that many consumers experienced a mix of denial, helplessness, and rationalization when confronted with uncomfortable truths about their favorite products. This insight helped her understand the complexity behind consumer inertia, the difficulty in changing habits even when motivation and knowledge were present. Jessica also explored the cultural factors influencing consumption patterns, from the status symbol of owning the latest gadget to the convenience culture that prioritized speed and ease over sustainability. She visited suburban malls and bustling urban markets, observing the push and pull between desire, identity, and conscience. These scenes were brought to life with rich descriptions that made readers feel the tension in the air. The allure of shiny packaging, the persuasive voice of salespeople, the internal debates customers faced in their minds. The chapter's emotional core came from personal stories of individuals struggling to reconcile their values with their behaviors. Jessica met a young mother who grappled with choosing between affordable but harmful baby products and pricier organic alternatives, and a college student who recycled diligently but still found it hard to give up fast fashion. These narratives personalized the broader social dynamics and made the issues relatable and poignant. Jessica's writing style emphasized empathy and complexity, avoiding judgment and instead inviting readers to reflect on their own experiences and choices. The climax of this chapter emerged when Jessica uncovered the role of social media influencers and online communities in both perpetuating consumerism and offering pathways to change. She documented the rise of ethical influencers who promoted sustainable brands and conscious living, as well as the backlash from cancel culture and misinformation campaigns. This dynamic underscored the power of peer influence and the potential for digital platforms to both help and hinder progress. The hope within this climax lay in the growing movement of conscious consumers who used their voices and wallets to demand better products and corporate accountability. Jessica highlighted successful campaigns where collective action led to product reformulation or the removal of harmful ingredients. Yet the subsequent climax was the persistent challenges, greenwashing, skepticism, and the overwhelming flood of choices that made change difficult for many. Throughout the chapter, Jessica's own reflections and doubts surfaced, revealing her humanity and the universal struggle to align ideals with actions. She questioned how to inspire sustained behavioral change without shaming or alienating people, understanding that compassion and education were key. Mark's perspective as a behavioral scientist added depth to their conversations, reinforcing the importance of small steps and celebrating progress rather than perfection. The chapter concluded with Jessica attending a community workshop focused on mindful consumption, where participants shared their journeys toward more sustainable living. She felt a sense of connection and optimism, recognizing that the path forward was collective and incremental. Her closing words challenged readers to consider their own roles in the system, asking, "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" For Jessica, it was the belief that every choice mattered, and that awareness combined with compassion could transform the world one decision at a time. This chapter enriched the story with psychological insight and cultural context, deepening the emotional resonance while maintaining the thread of hope and action that defined Jessica's journey. Jessica's exploration into the psychology of consumer behavior opened a new window into the subtle forces shaping the products people buy and the lives they lead, but she soon realized that understanding these forces was only half the battle. The other half was discovering alternatives, innovations, inventions, and movements pushing back against the tide of waste, exploitation, and secrecy. This chapter traced Jessica's journey into the burgeoning world of sustainable technology and ethical innovation, shining a light on the hopeful future emerging from creativity, science, and human ingenuity. She began with visits to startups and research labs pioneering eco-friendly materials designed to replace plastics, metals mined through harmful methods, and synthetic chemicals with toxic legacies. Jessica described in vivid detail the feel of a lab where scientists crafted biodegradable packaging from seaweed, the hum of machines weaving fabric from recycled fibers, and the delicate process of developing plant-based leather substitutes. The excitement was palpable, a tangible sense that science and ethics could work hand in hand to heal wounds inflicted by decades of careless consumption. Jessica also traveled to communities implementing circular economies, systems designed to keep materials in use longer through repair, reuse, and recycling rather than the traditional, take-make-dispose, model. She met entrepreneurs running innovative clothing rental services, electronics refurbishment programs, and food waste reduction initiatives. These stories were filled with colorful characters, visionaries and pragmatists united by a commitment to sustainability and justice. Jessica's narrative style emphasized the drama and adventure of these innovations, portraying the inventors and activists as heroes embarking on quests to rewrite the rules of industry. The emotional arc of the chapter balanced awe at human creativity with realism about the obstacles these efforts faced, from funding shortages to resistance by entrenched interests. Jessica was particularly inspired by the story of a community in the Midwest that had transformed a former landfill into a thriving urban farm, turning pollution into nourishment through ingenuity and perseverance. This transformation symbolized the possibility of redemption and renewal, themes that resonated deeply with Jessica's own journey. Alongside these hopeful stories, Jessica remained vigilant about the potential pitfalls of techno-optimism, the belief that technology alone could solve social and environmental problems without addressing systemic inequalities or cultural change. She wove in critical perspectives from scholars and activists warning that innovation must be coupled with equity and accountability to avoid perpetuating harm in new forms. The chapter's climax centered on Jessica's participation in an international conference on sustainable design and ethical manufacturing, where she witnessed firsthand the exchange of ideas, debates, and commitments among global leaders, entrepreneurs, and activists. The event was a whirlwind of energy and passion, showcasing cutting-edge prototypes and inspiring collaborations. Jessica's reporting captured the excitement but also the challenges: how to scale innovations, ensure access across socio-economic divides, and navigate the complex terrain of global supply chains. The hope in this climax was the tangible progress being made and the growing network of allies dedicated to a just and sustainable future. Yet the subsequent climax reminded readers that progress was fragile, dependent on continued advocacy, investment, and cultural shifts. Jessica's reflections revealed a growing maturity and balance, hope tempered by realism, idealism informed by experience. Mark's role evolved as well, contributing insights on behavioral change and helping Jessica understand how to communicate complex ideas in ways that could inspire action without overwhelming or alienating audiences. The chapter concluded with Jessica returning home, energized and determined to share these stories of innovation as part of the broader movement she had helped ignite. Her closing words underscored the interconnectedness of technology, ethics, and human values. Life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She once again asked, "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" For Jessica, it was the belief that innovation, when guided by compassion and responsibility, could be a powerful force for healing and transformation. This chapter brought the narrative full circle, from exposing harm to highlighting hope, and invited readers to imagine a future shaped by creativity, justice, and love. Jessica's deep dive into sustainable innovation opened new horizons, but as her story unfolded, she discovered a vital dimension often overlooked: the power of storytelling itself. The narratives companies, consumers, and media tell about products shape perceptions and decisions in ways that can either perpetuate harm or inspire change. Jessica became fascinated with how language, imagery, and culture influence consumer behavior and corporate accountability. She began analyzing advertising campaigns, branding strategies, and social media content, revealing how powerful stories glossed over the darker truths she had uncovered. In one revealing investigation, Jessica exposed how a major tech company's Green campaign promoted their newest smartphone as environmentally friendly, highlighting recycled materials while downplaying the exploitative mining behind rare earth elements and the massive electronic waste generated. The dissonance between story and reality sparked a broader conversation about greenwashing, where companies use marketing to appear sustainable without making substantive changes. Jessica's writing in this chapter took on a sharper, more analytical tone while maintaining her hallmark emotional connection, demonstrating how language could manipulate feelings of trust, responsibility, and identity. She met with advertising experts who confirmed that brands carefully craft messages to tap into consumers' hopes and fears, often exploiting guilt or aspiration to drive sales. Yet, Jessica also found inspiring examples of authentic storytelling, companies and creators who use transparency and honesty to build trust and mobilize positive action. This included brands that shared full supply chain details, celebrated worker stories, and invited customers into their sustainability journeys. Jessica described how such openness, though risky, forged deeper connections and loyalty. The emotional climax of the chapter came when Jessica collaborated with a group of artists and activists to create a public campaign exposing the gap between product stories and truths. The project used striking visuals, storytelling, and social media to engage diverse audiences, sparking widespread discussion and media attention. Jessica felt a surge of hope as people began questioning advertising claims and demanding accountability. However, the subsequent climax revealed the backlash: corporate attempts to discredit the campaign, pushback from influencers tied to brands, and the challenge of overcoming consumer skepticism and information overload. Jessica's personal reflections surfaced: how to navigate the tension between cynicism and hope, and the responsibility of storytellers to foster critical thinking without despair. Mark's background in communications helped Jessica shape narratives that balanced truth-telling with empowerment, reminding her that stories could be both weapons and bridges. The chapter concluded with Jessica urging readers to become conscious consumers of stories themselves, to question the narratives they encounter and seek the deeper truths behind products and brands. Her closing message was both a challenge and an invitation. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Jessica, it was the conviction that honest storytelling could change the world, one story at a time. This chapter enriched the ongoing narrative by highlighting the role of culture and communication in shaping the ethics and futures of consumption, reinforcing the power of awareness, dialogue, and shared humanity. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jessica's journey had taken her from factory floors to legislative halls, from the psychology of consumers to the art of storytelling, yet she now faced one of the most personal challenges of her life, the challenge of reconciling her public crusade with her private relationships. The chapter opened with Jessica grappling with the emotional strain her work had placed on her family and friendships. Long hours, intense emotions, and the weight of difficult truths sometimes created distance and misunderstanding. Her parents, especially, struggled to grasp the depth of her commitment and the sacrifices it entailed. Jessica described the bittersweet moments of loneliness interspersed with tender conversations, revealing the human side behind the activist's public persona. She also explored her romantic relationship with Mark, whose steadfast support had been a pillar of strength but was not immune to tension. Their differing perspectives on risk, privacy, and public exposure led to conflicts that tested their bond. Jessica's writing in this chapter was raw and vulnerable, inviting readers into the complex emotional landscape that underpins passionate advocacy. She portrayed the delicate balance between self-care and dedication, between personal happiness and public responsibility. The narrative painted vivid scenes of quiet moments, sunsets shared, late-night talks, the small acts of kindness that kept love alive amid chaos. The emotional climax came as Jessica faced a pivotal decision, an opportunity to take her work to a national platform with the risk of further straining her personal life. The tension between ambition and intimacy was palpable, forcing Jessica to confront what truly mattered and how to find harmony. The hope within this climax was the realization that vulnerability could be a source of strength and connection rather than weakness. Jessica's reflections highlighted the importance of boundaries, communication, and empathy in sustaining meaningful relationships while pursuing difficult goals. The chapter also underscored a profound lesson she learned from her mother, a reminder that love and family are not just motivations but essential anchors in turbulent times. Mark's perspective added nuance, showing how partnership required ongoing effort and openness. The resolution was a renewed commitment to balance, with Jessica choosing to embrace imperfection and prioritize connection without compromising her mission. The chapter concluded with a heartfelt message to readers: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. Jessica invited the audience to share their own stories of balancing personal and public challenges by asking, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter deepened the story's emotional resonance, revealing the human costs and rewards behind activism and reminding readers that the fight for justice is inseparable from the fight for love and connection. The narrative's vivid descriptions, emotional honesty, and hopeful tone created a powerful space for reflection and inspiration. Jessica's journey had revealed many hidden truths and sparked hope for a better future, but as she moved deeper into her mission, she realized that the fight for ethical consumption and transparency was also a fight for justice, environmental justice, social justice, and economic justice. This chapter took her to communities disproportionately affected by the negative impacts of the very products and industries she had exposed. Jessica traveled to towns near hazardous factories, agricultural areas plagued by pesticide overuse, and regions devastated by mining operations. The contrast between glossy product advertisements and the lived realities of these communities was stark. Jessica's narrative vividly described the sights and sounds of these places. The haze over a small town skyline, the tired faces of workers, the resilience in the eyes of local leaders determined to fight back. These stories personalized the systemic inequalities underlying consumer culture, showing how marginalized groups often bore the brunt of environmental degradation and exploitation. Jessica met families who had lost loved ones to industrial pollution, activists organizing against corporate abuse, and scientists studying the health impacts of toxins. Their voices brought urgency and gravitas to the story, challenging readers to see beyond their own consumption to the human and ecological costs hidden far away. The emotional arc of this chapter centered on Jessica's own transformation as she confronted the intersectionality of justice, how race, class, and geography shaped vulnerability and resistance. She wrestled with feelings of guilt and responsibility but also hope and determination inspired by the courage of those she met. The climax came when Jessica covered a community-led campaign that successfully pressured a major corporation to clean up a contaminated site and compensate affected residents. This victory was hard-won and fragile but symbolized the power of collective action and solidarity. The hope in this moment was profound, yet the subsequent climax reminded readers of ongoing challenges, legal battles, corporate pushback, and the constant need for vigilance. Jessica's reflections emphasized that justice required systemic change, not just individual action. She highlighted how consumer awareness must be coupled with policy reform and grassroots empowerment. Mark's insights helped frame the broader societal implications, reinforcing the interconnectedness of ecological and social systems. The chapter concluded with Jessica attending a cultural festival celebrating indigenous knowledge and environmental stewardship, a powerful reminder of alternative ways of relating to the earth and each other. Her final words echoed the story's central message: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She asked readers once again, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter deepened the narrative by centering justice and equity, enriching the emotional and intellectual landscape and inspiring readers to expand their vision of ethical living beyond individual choice to collective responsibility. Jessica's investigation into environmental and social justice had unveiled the stark disparities between communities impacted by harmful industries and those consuming their products from afar, but she soon realized that another critical force shaped this landscape: corporate culture. She embarked on a journey inside some of the largest companies implicated in producing the very products she had scrutinized, aiming to understand the people, values, and decisions behind the corporate facades. Jessica gained rare access to boardrooms, factories, and executive offices, interviewing CEOs, middle managers, line workers, and whistleblowers. The portraits she painted were complex and human, revealing not villains but often conflicted individuals navigating immense pressures from shareholders, market demands, and personal ethics. She described scenes inside sleek headquarters contrasted with grimy factory floors, capturing the tension between profit-driven targets and the growing calls for sustainability and transparency. Jessica's writing humanized the corporate players without excusing harmful practices, offering nuanced insights into how company culture shaped product development, marketing, and labor relations. She highlighted cases where visionary leaders pushed for green innovation but faced resistance from conservative factions focused on short-term gains. The emotional core of the chapter lay in stories of internal struggles, employees risking careers to blow the whistle, managers wrestling with ethical dilemmas, and teams striving to embed social responsibility into corporate DNA. Jessica's narrative delved into how these internal conflicts influenced decisions that ultimately affected millions of consumers and workers. The chapter's climax unfolded around a dramatic board meeting where a proposal for a groundbreaking sustainability initiative faced fierce opposition from key stakeholders. Jessica described the charged atmosphere, the impassioned arguments, and the eventual narrow approval that signaled a tentative step forward. The hope here was the recognition that change was possible from within, that corporate culture was not monolithic but mutable through persistent effort and leadership. Yet the subsequent climax reminded readers that such victories were fragile and often symbolic, challenged by entrenched interests and market realities. Jessica's reflections grappled with the paradox of capitalism, the tension between innovation and exploitation, and the need for systemic shifts in incentives and accountability. Mark contributed by explaining organizational psychology concepts that illuminated why change was so difficult but also how culture could be transformed over time. The chapter concluded with Jessica attending a company-sponsored community event where employees and local residents came together to celebrate a new environmental program. The scene symbolized the potential for bridging divides and building shared purpose. Her closing words reiterated the story's guiding theme. Life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She invited readers to reflect, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter enriched the story by exploring the human and cultural dimensions within corporations, emphasizing complexity, struggle, and the possibility of transformation from within systems often viewed as rigid and unyielding. Jessica's immersion into corporate culture had revealed the internal battles between profit and purpose, but she now turned her focus to the global supply chains that linked raw materials, factories, and consumers across continents in a complex web of production and distribution. This chapter took her on an eye-opening journey through the intricate, often opaque logistics that brought everyday products to American homes, revealing the hidden costs and ethical dilemmas embedded at every step. Jessica traveled to bustling ports, massive warehouses, and remote mining sites, documenting the human toil and environmental impact that rarely surfaced in the polished advertisements and store shelves. She met dockworkers laboring in difficult conditions, truck drivers navigating treacherous routes, and miners extracting precious metals at great personal risk. The narrative painted vivid pictures of the global machinery in motion, the clang of cranes, the endless rows of shipping containers, the crowded streets of industrial towns. Jessica's writing emphasized the scale and complexity of these operations while highlighting the vulnerability of the workers and ecosystems involved. The emotional core of this chapter centered on stories of exploitation and resilience. Jessica recounted interviews with individuals trapped in exploitative labor situations, including children working in hazardous conditions and adults forced to accept low wages to survive. At the same time, she documented grassroots efforts to improve transparency and fairness, such as fair trade certifications, union organizing, and technology-driven tracking systems that aimed to hold companies accountable. The chapter's climax came as Jessica uncovered a scandal involving a supplier using child labor to mine cobalt, a critical component in electronics and electric vehicles, exposing the dark underbelly of a product beloved by many Americans. This revelation sparked outrage and a push for reform but also revealed the difficulty of untangling deeply entrenched problems in global supply chains. The hope in this moment lay in the growing consumer and corporate awareness leading to initiatives to clean up supply chains and invest in ethical sourcing. Yet the subsequent climax reminded readers that these efforts were often met with resistance and that systemic change required sustained pressure from multiple fronts. Jessica's reflections explored the paradoxes of globalization, the opportunities for economic development alongside exploitation, the challenges of regulation in a borderless world, and the necessity of informed consumer choices. Mark's expertise helped contextualize the global economic forces at play and the potential for innovative technologies like blockchain to improve transparency. The chapter concluded with Jessica visiting a cooperative mining project in South America that prioritized community well-being and environmental stewardship, offering a hopeful alternative model. Her closing words reaffirmed the narrative's core message. Life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She invited readers once more to ponder, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter expanded the story's scope to the global stage, weaving together human stories, economic realities, and emerging solutions, deepening the reader's understanding of the true cost and potential of everyday products. Jessica's journey through the global supply chains had revealed harsh truths and hopeful possibilities, but she soon found herself confronting the environmental devastation intertwined with production, the pollution, habitat destruction, and climate impact caused by the making and disposal of everyday products. This chapter chronicled her encounters with scientists, activists, and communities living at the front lines of environmental crises linked to consumerism. Jessica described vividly the poisoned rivers running near factories, the smog-choked skies over industrial zones, and the mountains of waste accumulating in landfills and oceans. She met marine biologists studying microplastics infiltrating food chains, conservationists fighting deforestation for commodity crops, and residents suffering from toxic air and water. The emotional core of this chapter lay in the tension between despair and determination, the devastating environmental damage juxtaposed with the resilience and creativity of those striving to protect and restore ecosystems. Jessica's writing brought these scenes to life through sensory detail, the acrid smell of chemical runoff, the eerie silence of a dead forest, the hopeful green shoots emerging in reclaimed lands. The chapter's climax focused on a dramatic legal battle where a community successfully sued a corporation for contamination, setting a precedent for corporate environmental responsibility. Jessica portrayed the courtroom tension, the emotional testimonies, and the eventual victory that brought relief but also underscored ongoing challenges. The hope in this moment was the power of collective action and the legal system to drive change, yet the subsequent climax reminded readers of the relentless pace of environmental degradation and the urgent need for systemic shifts in production and consumption patterns. Jessica's reflections emphasized that environmental health was inseparable from social justice and economic reform, calling for holistic approaches. Mark's insights helped frame the global implications of local environmental crises and the importance of sustainable innovation. The chapter concluded with Jessica participating in a community-led restoration project, planting trees and cleaning waterways, a symbolic act of healing and hope. Her closing words echoed the story's enduring theme: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She posed the familiar question to readers: what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter deepened the narrative's emotional and ethical dimensions by highlighting the urgent environmental stakes tied to everyday products and the power of grassroots action to inspire change. Jessica's journey through environmental devastation and grassroots restoration led her to confront the role of technology in both causing and solving the problems she had uncovered. This chapter explored the double-edged sword of technological advancement, how innovations had enabled mass production and consumption, often at great cost, but also held the promise of sustainability, transparency, and empowerment. Jessica visited cutting-edge research centers developing clean energy solutions, waste reduction technologies, and circular economy platforms. She described the excitement of witnessing solar panels being produced with lower emissions, the intricate design of modular electronics meant for easy repair, and AI-driven systems tracking product life cycles for responsible recycling. Yet Jessica also probed the darker side, the rare minerals powering batteries sourced through exploitative mining, the electronic waste mounting in developing countries, and the digital divide limiting access to green technologies. The emotional heart of the chapter was Jessica's internal conflict, a blend of optimism for innovation's potential and realism about its limits. She recounted conversations with engineers, ethicists, and activists debating technology's role in shaping a just future. The chapter's climax came during a global summit on sustainable technology where Jessica witnessed bold commitments to reduce carbon footprints and increase transparency but also candid acknowledgments of obstacles and unintended consequences. The hope lay in the collaborative spirit and visionary goals, while the subsequent climax reminded readers that technology alone could not fix systemic issues without cultural and policy change. Jessica's reflections emphasized the need for integrated solutions combining tech, ethics, and activism. Mark's expertise added depth on how technological adoption depended on social context and behavior change. The chapter concluded with Jessica participating in a workshop teaching community members to repair and repurpose electronics, symbolizing empowerment through knowledge. Her closing words reinforced the overarching message: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She asked readers, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter illuminated technology's complex role in the story, blending hope and caution, and encouraging thoughtful engagement with innovation. Jessica's exploration of technology's promises and pitfalls led her to the heart of consumer behavior, the choices individuals make daily and the psychology behind them. This chapter delved into the subtle forces shaping how people buy, use, and discard products, revealing how habits, social norms, and marketing influence consumption patterns. Jessica engaged with behavioral scientists, economists, and cultural critics who explained concepts like planned obsolescence, status consumption, and the impact of digital advertising algorithms. She described how consumers often unconsciously perpetuated cycles of waste and exploitation, driven by desires for convenience, status, and novelty. The narrative painted vivid scenes of crowded shopping malls, endless scrolling through online marketplaces, and the emotional highs and lows tied to acquiring and discarding goods. Jessica also highlighted emerging movements challenging these norms, such as minimalism, second-hand markets, and repair cultures, showcasing stories of individuals reclaiming control over their consumption. The emotional center of the chapter was Jessica's reflection on her own consumer habits, the tensions between ideals and reality, and the small but meaningful changes she and others could make. The chapter's climax involved a community initiative Jessica helped organize, a swap meet and repair fair encouraging people to rethink consumption and foster connection. The event's atmosphere buzzed with hope and solidarity, but Jessica acknowledged the uphill battle against entrenched habits and commercial pressures. The hope was the collective power of awareness and action, while the subsequent climax reminded readers of the ongoing challenges in shifting cultural paradigms. Jessica's reflections emphasized that conscious consumption was not about perfection but progress, inviting compassion and persistence. Mark's insights on behavioral economics provided practical tips for sustaining change. The chapter closed with Jessica encouraging readers to consider their own habits, ending with the familiar question, "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" This chapter brought the story full circle to individual agency, highlighting the emotional and psychological dimensions of consumerism and inspiring hope for personal and collective transformation. Jessica's growing awareness of consumer behavior's psychological and cultural underpinnings led her to explore the role of education in fostering ethical consumption and sustainability. This chapter took her into classrooms, community centers, and online learning platforms where activists, educators, and students were cultivating new generations of conscious consumers and changemakers. Jessica vividly described diverse educational settings, from urban schools integrating environmental justice into curricula to grassroots workshops teaching zero-waste living skills. She highlighted inspiring educators who use storytelling, hands-on projects, and critical thinking exercises to engage young people in understanding the hidden impacts of everyday products and empowering them to make informed choices. The emotional core of this chapter was the hope and energy radiating from students eager to challenge the status quo and build more just and sustainable futures. Jessica recounted moving moments of youth-led campaigns, art projects, and community actions that demonstrated the power of education to ignite passion and agency. The chapter's climax unfolded at a national conference where Jessica witnessed a panel of young activists sharing their visions and challenges, reflecting a dynamic and evolving movement. The hope in this scene was palpable, as these voices embodied the potential for long-term systemic change driven by education and youth leadership. Yet the subsequent climax reminded readers of barriers such as unequal access to quality education, resistance from institutions, and the complexity of embedding sustainability in mainstream learning. Jessica's reflections underscored education's critical role but also the need for systemic support and innovation. Mark's perspective added insights on how learning environments shape attitudes and behaviors over time. The chapter concluded with Jessica launching an online platform to connect educators, students, and activists worldwide, fostering collaboration and resource sharing. Her closing words reiterated the story's key message: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She invited readers to reflect once more, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter broadened the narrative's scope to the transformative potential of education, blending hope, realism, and a call to collective action. Jessica's journey through education and youth activism naturally expanded into the realm of policy and governance, where laws and regulations shape the landscape of consumer products and corporate behavior. This chapter chronicled her exploration of political systems, lobbying battles, and the tireless efforts of advocates working to transform legislation for environmental protection, labor rights, and corporate accountability. Jessica attended hearings, interviewed lawmakers, activists, and industry insiders, and described the complex dance between power, profit, and public interest. The chapter's climax centered on the release of a documentary Jessica co-produced, revealing the true costs behind popular products, which ignited a social media movement demanding transparency and ethical reform. The hope lay in the collective power of narrative to shift values and mobilize communities, yet the subsequent climax acknowledged challenges such as misinformation, media saturation, and the commercial pressures shaping content. Jessica's reflections emphasized that authentic stories rooted in lived experience could break through apathy and cynicism. Mark's expertise added depth on narrative psychology and the role of media in cultural change. The chapter concluded with Jessica leading a workshop teaching storytelling techniques to activists and educators, empowering them to amplify their messages. Her closing words reinforced the story's central message: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She invited readers to consider, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter enriched the narrative by highlighting the transformative power of stories, art, and media in driving social and environmental progress. Jessica's work on storytelling and media's power to inspire change revealed a new frontier: how technology and digital platforms both amplify voices and complicate truth in the fight for ethical consumption and sustainability. This chapter followed Jessica as she navigated the digital landscape, exploring the promise and pitfalls of social media, online communities, and emerging technologies like AI and blockchain. She described attending virtual conferences, interviewing tech innovators, and engaging with activists leveraging digital tools to increase transparency and accountability. Jessica captured the energy of online campaigns mobilizing millions, but also the shadows of misinformation, algorithmic biases, and digital divides that threaten to undermine progress. The emotional core of this chapter was Jessica's personal struggle to balance the empowering potential of digital connection with the risks of overwhelm, disillusionment, and misinformation. She recounted moments of exhilaration when a viral campaign led to corporate commitments, alongside times of frustration facing online harassment and fake news. The chapter's climax occurred during a coordinated global online protest demanding ethical sourcing in the electronics industry, where Jessica witnessed firsthand the collective power of digital activism but also the limits of virtual engagement without offline action. She painted vivid scenes inside government chambers, protest marches outside capitals, and late-night strategy sessions among advocacy groups. The emotional core of the chapter lay in the tension between hope for reform and frustration with political inertia and corruption. Jessica recounted moments of breakthrough: passing of stricter regulations on chemical disclosures, bans on single-use plastics, as well as setbacks when powerful interests stymied progress. The chapter's climax centered on a dramatic vote on landmark legislation Jessica had helped bring public attention to, capturing the anticipation, lobbying efforts, and eventual narrow victory that marked a milestone in the fight for transparency and sustainability. The hope was in democratic processes' potential to drive systemic change, even amid resistance. Yet the following climax reminded readers that legal victories often required ongoing vigilance and enforcement. Jessica's reflections emphasized the importance of civic engagement, coalition building, and persistence in policy work. Mark's insights illuminated the interplay between policy, public opinion, and corporate strategy. The chapter concluded with Jessica organizing a community forum to educate citizens about their rights and encourage participation in governance. Her closing words reaffirmed the story's enduring theme: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She asked readers, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter deepened the narrative's political dimension, illustrating the challenges and possibilities of using policy as a lever for change. Jessica's journey through policy and governance had exposed her to the complex interplay between laws, lobbying, and activism, but she soon realized that true transformation required shifting the very mindset driving consumer culture and corporate behavior. This chapter explored the power of storytelling, art, and media in shaping public consciousness and inspiring change. Jessica immersed herself in communities of artists, filmmakers, writers, and social media influencers who were crafting compelling narratives to expose hidden truths and envision sustainable futures. She described vivid scenes of vibrant murals depicting environmental struggles, powerful documentaries screening in packed theaters, and viral campaigns sparking conversations worldwide. Jessica highlighted how these creative efforts moved beyond mere information, evoking empathy, urgency, and hope. The emotional core of the chapter was the recognition of storytelling as a tool for connection and empowerment. Jessica recounted moments when stories she helped tell resonated deeply with audiences, sparking reflection and action. The hope was in the new possibilities technology offered to democratize information and amplify marginalized voices, while the subsequent climax reminded readers of the ongoing battles for truth, equity, and meaningful impact in the digital age. Jessica's reflections emphasized the need for digital literacy, critical thinking, and integrative approaches combining online and offline efforts. Mark's perspective provided insights into the evolving digital ecosystem and its social implications. The chapter concluded with Jessica launching an interactive platform connecting consumers, producers, and activists to share verified information and resources. Her closing words reaffirmed the story's enduring theme: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She invited readers to reflect, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter expanded the narrative into the digital realm, blending optimism and caution about technology's role in shaping the future of consumption and activism. Jessica's exploration of digital activism and technology's dual nature led her to examine the critical role of community in sustaining long-term change. This chapter followed her as she engaged with diverse grassroots groups, cooperatives, and neighborhood organizations transforming local spaces through collective action. Jessica vividly described community gardens sprouting in urban lots, cooperative repair cafes restoring broken goods, and neighborhood assemblies crafting localized sustainability plans. She highlighted stories of people from different backgrounds uniting around shared goals despite economic, racial, and cultural differences, illustrating the power of community resilience and solidarity. The emotional core of the chapter centered on Jessica's own experience joining a cooperative, feeling a renewed sense of belonging and purpose. The chapter's climax unfolded during a community festival celebrating local efforts to reduce waste and promote ethical consumption, where Jessica witnessed firsthand the energy and creativity such gatherings generated. The hope was palpable in the collective commitment and visible results, while the subsequent climax acknowledged challenges like resource limitations, burnout, and external pressures threatening community initiatives. Jessica's reflections emphasized that while individual actions matter, sustainable transformation required nurturing relationships and networks rooted in trust and mutual support. Mark's insights deepened the discussion on social capital and the dynamics of community empowerment. The chapter concluded with Jessica facilitating a workshop on building inclusive and effective community projects, encouraging readers to find or create spaces of connection. Her closing words reaffirmed the story's core message: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She invited readers once again to consider, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter brought the narrative home to the essential human dimension of change, celebrating the power of community to sustain hope and action in the face of daunting challenges. Jessica's deepening involvement with community initiatives illuminated the complex interplay between personal responsibility and systemic change in the quest for ethical consumption and sustainability. This chapter traced her reflections on the balance between individual actions, like mindful purchasing, waste reduction, and advocacy, and the broader structural reforms necessary to transform industries and societies. Jessica recounted conversations with thought leaders who challenged simplistic narratives blaming consumers alone, emphasizing instead the roles of corporations, governments, and economic systems in shaping consumption patterns. She described visiting socially responsible businesses pioneering circular economy models and policy makers advocating for regulatory frameworks that incentivized sustainability. The emotional core of this chapter was Jessica's grappling with feelings of both empowerment and frustration, recognizing her ability to influence change but also confronting the limits of individual efforts in isolation. The chapter's climax centered on a public debate where Jessica participated alongside corporate representatives and activists, discussing accountability and shared responsibility. The hope lay in the possibility of collaboration across sectors, yet the subsequent climax underscored the tensions and mistrust complicating such partnerships. Jessica's reflections stressed the necessity of a multifaceted approach combining personal ethics, corporate responsibility, and political will. Mark's expertise contributed nuanced perspectives on systems thinking and change management. The chapter concluded with Jessica proposing a framework for integrated action that individuals, organizations, and governments could adopt collectively. Her closing words reaffirmed the story's fundamental theme: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She once more invited readers to reflect, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This chapter synthesized the narrative's key threads, encouraging a holistic vision of change grounded in cooperation and shared commitment. Jessica's long journey, filled with discoveries, challenges, and moments of hope, reached its culmination in this chapter as she reflected on the profound lessons learned about love, sacrifice, and the power of human connection to shape a better future. After traveling through the complex worlds of production, consumption, technology, environment, policy, education, and community, Jessica returned home changed, more aware, more determined, and more hopeful. She revisited the people and places that had inspired her most, weaving together the personal stories and global struggles that had touched her heart. The emotional core of this chapter centered on Jessica's deep sense of gratitude and commitment, as well as the bittersweet recognition of the ongoing nature of the work ahead. She recounted intimate moments with family and friends, drawing strength from their support, and shared how love had been the constant thread guiding her through difficult times. The chapter's climax was a powerful gathering, a celebration of collective action and resilience, where individuals from diverse backgrounds came together to share stories, art, and plans for the future. The hope was vibrant in the shared determination and joy, while the final climax reminded readers that the path forward would require ongoing effort, courage, and compassion. Jessica's reflections emphasized that true change arises not from isolated acts but from the sustained, loving connections that bind communities and generations. Mark's final insights framed the story's lessons in a broader philosophical context, underscoring the intertwined nature of love, sacrifice, and transformation. The chapter concluded with Jessica's heartfelt message to readers: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She invited them to join the ongoing journey by answering, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This closing chapter brought the story full circle, leaving readers inspired to embrace their own capacity for love and action in creating a more just and sustainable world. Jessica's journey had taken her through a vast landscape of challenges and triumphs, revealing the complex layers of ethical consumption, activism, and systemic change. Yet, as she stood at this new crossroads, she realized that lasting transformation started with each individual, and the power they hold not just to act, but to inspire others. This chapter unfolds around Jessica's evolving role as a catalyst, someone who didn't just make changes in her own life but worked to spark a wider movement of conscious awareness and collective action. She began by organizing small gatherings in local community centers, schools, and even informal spaces like coffee shops and parks. These meetings weren't just about sharing information, they were about creating connections, building trust, and awakening a sense of shared purpose. Jessica understood that change could feel overwhelming, especially when faced with the enormity of environmental and social issues. So, her approach emphasized compassion and encouragement, inviting people to reflect on what small, meaningful steps they could take in their own lives. Jessica vividly recalled the early days when turnout was modest, and many attendees expressed skepticism or fatigue. Yet, as word spread and stories of personal breakthroughs circulated, the gatherings grew. People started to see that they weren't alone in their desire for a better world, and that collective efforts, no matter how small, had real impact. She told stories of a single mother who began composting at home, inspiring her neighbors to start community compost bins, of a teenager who started a school recycling program, of a retiree who organized neighborhood cleanups. These personal stories became the beating heart of Jessica's work, grounding abstract concepts in tangible human experiences. Building on this momentum, Jessica launched an online platform that connected these local efforts, creating a virtual hub for resources, support, and shared victories. The platform featured educational content, how-to guides, event calendars, and forums where users exchanged tips and encouragement. Through social media campaigns, she amplified voices that often went unheard, activists from marginalized communities, indigenous leaders, and young people leading innovative projects. Jessica recognized that inclusion was vital, and she worked hard to ensure the movement embraced diverse perspectives and addressed different needs. The emotional core of this chapter lay in Jessica's own vulnerability and determination. She openly shared moments of doubt and exhaustion, acknowledging that sustaining motivation over time was one of the biggest challenges. Yet she found strength in the community she helped nurture, friends who celebrated successes and supported each other through setbacks. Jessica's story was not just about individual heroism but about weaving a tapestry of relationships where love, empathy, and shared commitment created resilience. The chapter's climax built toward a large-scale community event Jessica organized, a festival that brought together people from all walks of life to celebrate sustainable living and collective action. The festival featured workshops on zero-waste practices, panels with local leaders, art installations made from recycled materials, and spaces for storytelling and music. It was a joyful, vibrant occasion where people connected, learned, and felt inspired to continue their efforts. Jessica described the electric energy in the air, the laughter, the earnest conversations, the sense of hope pulsing through the crowd. It was a moment of collective affirmation that change was possible when hearts and hands joined together. Yet, the chapter also faced the realities beneath the celebration. Jessica did not shy away from discussing the obstacles they encountered: resistance from some community members who were wary of change, pushback from businesses threatened by new norms, and the emotional toll of activism that sometimes led to burnout. These challenges reminded her that transformation was not linear or easy but required patience, flexibility, and ongoing care for oneself and others. Jessica emphasized that embracing imperfection and acknowledging setbacks were part of the journey. Throughout the chapter, Jessica reflected on the lessons she learned about leadership and influence. She recognized that effective changemakers needed to combine passion with strategy, empathy with pragmatism. With Mark's guidance, she developed skills in organizing, communication, and coalition building that strengthened her impact. Together, they discussed the importance of listening deeply, creating inclusive spaces, and adapting to evolving circumstances. As the chapter closed, Jessica extended a heartfelt invitation to readers, to find their own source of motivation and to join the movement in whatever way felt meaningful. Her closing words echoed the story's core message: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. And with the familiar question, what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough, she encouraged reflection and connection. The story's horizon by celebrating the power of individuals and communities to inspire and sustain change. It acknowledged the difficulties but highlighted the joy, connection, and hope found in shared purpose. Jessica's journey illustrated that even small actions, when woven together with love and intention, could create ripples of transformation reaching far beyond oneself. Jessica's journey into community empowerment and personal transformation was filled with moments of triumph, but dives into the unexpected challenges that tested her resolve and deepened her understanding of resilience. After months of organizing, teaching, and inspiring others, Jessica encountered a setback that forced her to confront doubts she hadn't faced before, both about the movement and about herself. The chapter begins with Jessica receiving news that a major local business had launched a campaign pushing back against some of the sustainability initiatives her community had championed. This corporate backlash threatened not only the progress made but also fractured trust within the community, stirring fear and skepticism among supporters. Jessica vividly describes the initial shock and frustration she felt. The campaign included misleading advertisements that painted the activists as extreme and unrealistic, swaying some community members to question the value of the efforts. Jessica's emotional struggle became a central thread, revealing her vulnerability and the weight of leadership. She grappled with feelings of discouragement, wondering if her work had been in vain. Yet, this low point marked the beginning of a deeper, more nuanced understanding of activism and change. As Jessica reflected, she realized that opposition was inevitable whenever deep-rooted systems were challenged. Instead of retreating, she chose to respond with openness and dialogue. The chapter narrates her efforts to rebuild trust through town hall meetings, where she invited skeptics and business representatives to share their concerns openly. Jessica's approach wasn't to confront but to listen, seeking common ground and acknowledging legitimate worries about economic impact and job security. These meetings were tense and emotional, but they planted seeds of mutual respect and understanding. The emotional core of the chapter lies in Jessica's personal growth through this conflict. She learned to balance idealism with pragmatism, realizing that sustainable change required negotiation and compromise without sacrificing core values. Jessica also recognized the importance of self-care and community support to avoid burnout, embracing moments of rest and reflection as essential parts of the process. The chapter includes intimate scenes of Jessica confiding in close friends and mentors, showing the human side behind the activist's public role. The climax builds as Jessica and her allies launch a collaborative initiative that involves the local business, creating a joint program focused on sustainable practices that protect jobs while reducing environmental harm. This unexpected partnership becomes a symbol of hope, illustrating that even amidst conflict, bridges can be built. The chapter's hopeful resolution emphasizes that change is often messy and nonlinear, but persistence and empathy can transform opposition into opportunity. Mark's perspective adds depth by discussing the psychology of resistance and strategies for effective conflict resolution within movements. Together, Jessica and Mark explore how embracing complexity rather than seeking quick wins leads to stronger, more resilient outcomes. The chapter closes with Jessica reflecting on the lessons learned and reaffirming her commitment to the journey ahead. Her parting words to readers resonate with honesty and encouragement. Change is never easy, but it's in the struggle that we discover our true strength. What's one challenge that has pushed you to grow, even when it felt impossible? This chapter adds richness to Jessica's story by portraying the inevitable challenges of real-world activism and the transformative power of perseverance, dialogue, and growth. Jessica's experience navigating challenges and building bridges opened her eyes to the incredible potential of innovation in driving sustainable change. Chapter 28 explores how she embraced new ideas and technologies to amplify her impact and empower her community in fresh, creative ways. Inspired by the collaboration with the local business and the lessons learned from conflict, Jessica began to see innovation not just as gadgets or tech, but as a mindset, an openness to experimentation, creativity, and adaptation. The chapter opens with Jessica attending a conference on social innovation and sustainability, where she encounters entrepreneurs, scientists, and activists pioneering groundbreaking solutions. She is particularly fascinated by projects using renewable energy, circular economy models, and digital platforms that promote transparency and consumer empowerment. These innovations spark ideas about how she might integrate technology with grassroots efforts. Back home, Jessica starts pilot projects combining community organizing with technology. She works with local schools to introduce educational apps that teach children about sustainability through interactive games. She helps set up a community-run solar power system that reduces energy costs and carbon footprints. She also supports local artisans by launching an online marketplace promoting ethically made products, connecting them directly with conscious consumers nationwide. Jessica's emotional journey here is one of renewed hope and excitement, tempered by the realistic awareness that innovation alone isn't a magic bullet. She faces technical glitches, funding struggles, and occasional skepticism from community members wary of change. Yet, her persistence and collaborative spirit keep the projects moving forward. The chapter's climax comes with the launch of a digital storytelling platform where community members share their experiences, challenges, and successes. This virtual space becomes a hub of inspiration and learning, fostering a sense of belonging and collective empowerment. The hope in this chapter is palpable: innovation as a tool for inclusion, education, and sustainability, making ethical choices more accessible and engaging. The subsequent climax reminds readers that innovation requires ongoing learning, flexibility, and humility. Jessica reflects on the importance of keeping human connection at the center, ensuring that technology serves people, not the other way around. Mark's insights deepen the discussion by highlighting trends in social entrepreneurship and the ethical implications of emerging technologies. Together, they explore how to balance progress with equity, ensuring that innovations benefit all members of society. The chapter closes with Jessica inviting readers to imagine the future they want to create and consider what innovations they might embrace or develop in their own communities. Her final words echo the story's core message: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. And with the familiar question, what's one new idea or innovation that excites you to make a difference, she encourages curiosity and action. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?